The United Kingdom submitted its views on an arms trade treaty to the United Nations in March last year. The United Kingdom wants to work towards a strong treaty that can support the legitimate trade of arms, but pressure on the illegal side, particularly in small arms weapons. Mr. Miliband told the gathering it was important to maintain interest at the United Nations.
Why is an arms trade treaty important? There is a huge international debate, still rightly now, about nuclear disarmament. And many of you will have followed the interventions of a series of secretaries of state in the US, former secretaries of state, as well as the commitments that have been made by the British and other governments. But I think it's a less well-known fact that a huge amount of the killing that's going on around the world is actually because of small arms, not big arms. And it's the arms trade that we are focusing on here, and in particular the unregulated arms trade. And I think it's important to underline that, because I think it underpins the coalition that has come together. It's the unregulated supply of arms that fuels conflict. I was personally really struck when I looked at the Oxfam evidence that's been put together for this campaign. £18 billion, they've calculated, lost every year in development opportunities as a result of conflict that's fueled by the unregulated arms trade. I don't know whether the figure of $284 billion that Oxfam has calculated since 1990, maybe we'll hear a bit more about how that was calculated. But armed conflict is a massive source of instability, not just for individual countries and communities, but actually for whole regions. And that's why there is real urgency to the work that is being undertaken here. I think it's important to say that an arms trade treaty doesn't claim to bring peace to every conflict overnight. It's important that we are realistic and honest about this. We're seeking to place high standards that would underpin the international arms trade, not a ban on arms, not a quote-unquote farewell to arms, but high standards that would not prevent states from exercising legitimate self-defense, but would tackle the gaps that exist in the current regime and the duplications and the overlaps that make the complexity of the current regimes, plural, such a source of instability in any sort of comprehensive cover. And I think it's probably important, to be honest too, that an arms trade treaty would make legitimate arms trade more straightforward rather than less, and it's important that we don't hide from that.
Many non-governmental organisations and global charities support the move. An Oxfam spokesman told the conference about the human costs.
For Oxfam, working on the ground in over 100 countries and present at any given time in around 30 countries in doing emergency response, often which is driven by conflicts, we see the daily reality of death and destruction caused by the unregulated trade in conventional arms. And we've estimated around 1,000 people are killed every day by small arms alone. And this should be enough reason alone for an arms trade treaty. But it's not just the immediate loss of life, an injury that's so devastating. Poor communities often experience very high levels of conflict and violence. And the availability of arms is like throwing petrol on the fire. They fuel conflicts and human rights abuses. They exacerbate poverty and make daily struggle for life harder for millions every day.
Kenya's Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations Geneva offices put it in a different but equally effective context.
We have been, as has been pointed out, a supporter of initiatives aimed at curtailing the proliferation of small arms and light weapons over the years. I think, as you all know, Kenya is surrounded by countries which have experienced conflicts at one time or another, ranging from Uganda. You will recall the days of Idi Amin. Ethiopia has gone through many conflicts. Sudan is still in conflict. Somalia is still a failed state. In fact, as a matter of fact, it's only our neighbor to the south, the United Republic of Tanzania, which, like Kenya, has enjoyed relative peace since independence. Conventional weapons, in particular small arms and light weapons, are the source of devastation in Africa, not nuclear weapons. And in this regard, I really welcomed your statement that I read in today's Independent, which says it is bizarre that we have treaties to stop nuclear arms but not stop weapons flooding into conflict zones.
The issue must not, said one diplomat, be allowed to be neglected at the United Nations.
So 2009 is a really crucial year for us. It's the year when the next round of discussion with all the UN membership will take place, and there will be in parallel a whole series of regional, continent-based discussions, trying to decide what is this treaty going to be, what is it going to contain, and what is it going to cover. As some have said, there's a hard core of skeptics, about 20 countries. It may not sound a lot, but it contains some of the major arms suppliers and some of the major consumers. The fact that today we have around this room a wide variety of stakeholders, I think indicates that in the UK we understand the synergies of interdependence of the 21st century world that we live in. That understanding is not necessarily as widespread as we'd like throughout the world community. There are many different aspects to an ATT. There is the human aspect, there is the developmental aspect, the business aspect, good governance. It touches many, many different fields.
Afterwards, the British Foreign Secretary repeated the British government's reasons for such a binding arms treaty.
We're losing 1,000 lives a day, including many children, as a result of the fact that there isn't a proper regulatory regime around the world for small arms and light weapons. The current export control systems are sometimes overlapping and sometimes leave big gaps. There's a huge human cost to that, and that's why an arms trade treaty is in the interest not just of human life, but also of the legitimate arms trade.
Can you summarise the message you want to take to the UN in New York in 2 weeks?
My message to the UN is that the unregulated flow of arms around the world and the poorly regulated flow of arms around the world is a threat to human life, whether you're an innocent civilian or whether you're a soldier on peacekeeping duties. And we've got to make sure that arms are kept out of the hands of the wrong people, because they're a threat to us all.
This was an important conference and further underlined the need for strict arms controls around the world.